Good morning, everyone. We'll just start in a few minutes and wait for some others to join. Okay, wonderful. I'll just kick us off. Welcome to the SNEP Network's Rhode Island Grant Funding Workshop. My name is Martha Shields, and I direct the New England Environmental Finance Center. We thought that with all this unprecedented funding available for climate resilience and infrastructure, we thought that it was important to repeat this workshop for the second year in a row with updated opportunities. Our goal for this workshop is to provide you with a look at the funding opportunities to advance your project implementation goals. We brought together representatives from the state of Rhode Island, as well as some regional and federal funding programs. You could see the webinar agenda there in the slide. Together, they represent over $160 million in funding focused on water quality and climate resiliency. After you hear from the individual funders, you'll have the opportunity to go into different Zoom rooms and meet and speak directly with the funders and ask them any questions that you may have. A few words about logistics. Before we begin the webinar, I'd like to take a moment to review the rules of engagement here. First, we have a Q&A session at the end of the funding presentations. But at any point during the webinar, you can also enter any questions into the Q&A box on your Zoom control panel. We also have closed captioning available for today's webinar. And to access the closed captioning, you'll need to click on the closed captioning icon in your Zoom control panel as shown on the slide. And finally, we'll be recording the webinar presentations, but only during the webinar portion of the workshop, not in the breakout rooms. We will provide you with a link to those in an email following the webinar. Next slide. Yeah. Here's a little program overview of the SNEP network. We are the organizers of this webinar, and the New England Environmental Finance Center hosts the SNEP network. We've been doing that since 2019. And you can see the logos of all our technical assistance partners that we've worked with throughout the years. Our mission, our collective mission, is to build local capacity by providing no-cost training, webinars, and technical assistance to communities in the Southeast New England program region. Communities in the SNEP region can request free technical assistance, and to learn more about the SNEP network, please go to that website. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the chief of the Surface Water Protection Branch of the Water Division at the US EPA's Region 1 office in Boston, Mel Cote. Handing it over to you, Mel.
You're muted there. Thank you. Thank you, Martha. And good morning, everyone. As Martha said, my name is Mel Cote. I'm chief of the Surface Water Protection Branch at EPA Region 1. I've worked on ocean, coastal, and watershed management since I started with EPA in 1990, and I've served as the chair of the Southeast New England Program, or SNEP, steering committee since 2015. Welcome to the first of two SNEP network funding workshops at which we will provide information on a wide variety of EPA, state, and other federal grant and technical assistance programs that support water quality and habitat restoration and protection in the SNEP region. Today's workshop will focus on these opportunities in Rhode Island, and tomorrow we will focus on Massachusetts. I'd like to thank the New England Environmental Finance Center for managing the SNEP network, which planned and is now hosting these workshops, as well as providing a lot of other great services for the SNEP region. Next slide. Great. As I'm sure most of you know, the SNEP region encompasses the coastal watersheds of Rhode Island and Southeast Massachusetts, including what I'd characterize as the groundwater sheds of southern Cape Cod, as well as Block Island, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket. Like many other parts of the country, the region faces many threats to healthy ecosystems and thriving communities, including water pollution, overdevelopment, lack of access to the water, climate change, and overburdened and underserved residents. There has been a lot of progress since the 1970s. Municipal and industrial wastewater discharges are strictly regulated, and if they are still contributing to poor water quality, can be further regulated with even more stringent requirements. However, while there's been progress reducing stormwater and other non-point sources, these remain very challenging in the face of development and associated increases in impervious surfaces. Those same pressures also contribute to habitat fragmentation and the loss of important ecosystem functions. Next slide. SNEP was established when Congress included language in the federal fiscal year 2012 Appropriations Act directing EPA to, quote, convene and lead a comprehensive regional policy coordination and outreach effort to protect, enhance, and restore the coastal watersheds of southern New England. Recognizing there already were several programs and plans focused on subregions of the SNEP region, including the Narragansett Bay and Buzzards Bay National Estuary programs with their comprehensive conservation and management plans, and the Cape Cod Commission and Mass DEP with the Cape Cod 208 area-wide water quality management plan. EPA saw this as an opportunity to build on those efforts by providing financial and technical assistance and coordinating and integrating their ongoing work through its own strategic plan and vision, which you see on the slide. SNEP also has emphasized and facilitated innovative technologies and approaches to our more intractable environmental problems, and has worked hard to develop better indicators to determine whether management activities are having their desired effect. Next slide. So base program funding has increased from an initial appropriation of $2 million in FY14. Is it 2 million? Yeah. To $7 million in FY23. And I should change that to say FY24, as you know, we just got our appropriations bills signed earlier this week. And like the other EPA geographic programs, SNEP has benefited from the influx of bipartisan infrastructure law funding, $15 million over the 5 years, or $3 million per year from FY22 through FY26. And by the way, at the end of this month, we'll be exactly 1/2 of the way through the 5-year time frame for bill funding. Although projects funded in the last 2 years will obviously continue on past FY26. This increased funding has enabled SNEP to expand its programming and, along with increases in other federal and state funding, provides an unprecedented opportunity to enhance and accelerate our collective efforts to restore and protect these critical ecosystems. The current federal administration also has placed a significant emphasis on targeting these additional resources to building resiliency against the impacts of climate change and assisting overburdened and underserved communities. EPA's FY24 appropriations bill was signed on Monday along with the rest of the federal government's. So while we won't know for sure for another month or so, well, that's not true anymore. We actually do know that SNEP has been level funded, base funding. So we do have a total of $10 million available again this year, as we did last year. And while the base appropriations are year to year, as you've seen, it's been a gradual upswing, and the bill funding is set level for the 5-year time frame. Next slide. So today you're going to learn about several upcoming opportunities for funding and technical assistance from SNEP, the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program, the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Rhode Island Clean Water Revolving Fund, and a couple of state climate resilience programs, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and the New England Water Infrastructure Network. Like SNEP, the National Estuary programs are all receiving bill funds to supplement their base appropriations, while EPA's State Revolving Fund, or SRF program, has received a very large increase in bill funds, all of which are passed through to states to accelerate the construction of new and upgraded municipal wastewater, stormwater, and drinking water infrastructure. The New England Water Infrastructure Network was established with EPA funding specifically to help communities gain access to bill funding for a wide range of water infrastructure needs. State governments also have stepped up to help build resiliency at the community level, and Rhode Island is no exception. We'll hear about their programs next. So with that, thank you for being here today, because it means you're interested in helping us achieve our shared vision for a resilient ecosystem of safe and healthy waters, thriving watersheds and natural lands, and sustainable communities. Martha?
Thanks, Mel. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Elizabeth Scott, who serves as the SNEP Network's Rhode Island liaison. Just a few words about Elizabeth's background. She has over 30 years' experience in water quality assessment and planning and water resources management in Rhode Island. She served as Deputy Chief in the Office of Water Resources at the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, RIDEM. There, she managed the state's water quality restoration, TMDL, and shellfish water quality monitoring programs. Throughout her career, she's worked to advance stormwater management policies, practices, and guidance, including assistance to municipalities with stormwater management planning and assessing the feasibility of stormwater utilities. It's really my pleasure to work with her, and I'm gonna hand it over to her right now. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you so much, Martha. And it truly is my pleasure to be able to introduce this array of funders for you all today. We're going to start out with the state programs and then move into the federal and regional funding opportunities. And our first speaker today is Anthony Hebert, who is Business Development Officer with the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. And Anthony is going to be telling us about the Municipal Resilience Program grant opportunities, as well as the SRF. Anthony?
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. So yeah, today I'll be talking a little bit about MRP Action Grant Program and our Clean Water State Revolving Fund at the Infrastructure Bank, or just RIB for short. So MRP program began in 2020. So far done 4 funding rounds. Our most recent was just a few weeks ago, and it was the largest one to date, where we allocated $12 million of funding to 20 projects total. So MRP program is in partnership with DEM and with the Nature Conservancy, and it starts out with DEM and TNC doing a workshop process. And every municipality in the state has the opportunity to go through this workshop process, where they identify potential community hazards and ways they can improve resiliency to the negative effects of climate change. And a lot of times these hazards are around urban heat island effect, and really with the intensity of the storms we're now seeing and increased precipitation related to coastal and inlet and riverine flooding, how we can make communities more resilient to those hazards. So every municipality, well, all but 4 have gone through the initial workshop process. And I know we're in process with the last few to get them as designated as resilient roaded communities. And I know DEM and TNC are working on an MRP 2.0 process, which will be working with ideally every community in the state and doing updates to their planning for resiliency, and then doing periodic updates. And once they've completed the workshop process, they are then eligible to apply for action grant funding through the bank's MRP Action Grant Program. And initially, we had caps on what could be asked for. I think it was around $500,000. And in the most recent round, we eliminated those caps. But the funding is for any municipalities that have gone through the workshop process, and they can fund a number of project types. I'll just go through a few of them. Most common being green stormwater infrastructure, coastal and riparian resiliency, road elevation, flood proofing or elevation of flood stations, berms and levees, culvert resizing, energy infrastructure resiliency, watershed restoration, and urban tree planting. The funding requests can come in for planning and design, outreach, modeling, permitting, and construction. So it kind of runs the whole gauntlet of what it can fund for projects. That being said, those projects that are a little bit further along and maybe have some of the design and permitting completed and are at that point where their construction and shovel ready are the ones that are receive some level of priority. So it is one of our priorities to make sure that we're getting funds out onto the street, onto projects that are feasible and that then can be constructed and completed within a couple of years. And as I stated, so we've gone through several funding rounds. The most recent was for $12 million. We have another funding round coming up this spring, working in extended partnership with DEM for another $4 million that MRP communities in the state can then apply for. So we have details coming on that within the next month and a half or so. Total, we've done 19.5 million action grants have been allocated to date and 48 projects across the state. There's a required 25% match from every community applying for a grant. And as I said, for the $4 million coming out, RFP will most likely be coming out in April. So please stay tuned for that. And the real purpose of the program is to improve climate resiliency across the state, making sure our infrastructure can manage these more negative impacts we're seeing, especially from flood threats across the region. And projects that come in and applications that come in must involve the removal, relocation, or redesign of critical infrastructure or incorporation of nature-based solutions to address an identified resiliency hazard in that community's summary of findings report from TNC from the workshop. So a couple of examples, like Agnes mentioned, before I was with the bank, I worked with the city of Pawtucket. So I was first I was applying for action grant from the bank, and now I'm helping to manage the program. So it's kind of come full circle. But one of the programs that we're working on is around the new train station in Pawtucket Central Falls. And we were able to get a grant for related to Pine Street North, as we referred. It's like the northern gateway to the train station. And this area is in the transit-oriented development TOD district. And in the district, it's 86% impervious gray surface, all runoff, all went into the combined sewer stormwater that into the Narragansett Bay, and trying to address that is a big priority. So funding was secured for street tree plantings, bioretention beds, replacing all the sidewalks, including permeable pavers, and then 3 parklets along the street. One for community seating areas, but putting vegetation, putting in green infrastructure, as I said, putting in more permeable pavers, and reducing stormwater runoff and localized flooding that we were seeing in the area. So that's a project that's currently underway. Another one is the Newport Shoreline project for Kings Park. And this one was just approved in the past month. And this one, it relates to replacing portions of the seawall, plantings of saltwater vegetation, and other beach erosion measures, and to help manage coastal flooding that they're seeing and improving public access along the area of Newport. And that one is our largest MRP award today, and one that we're very excited about. It's about $2.3 million was the funding that Newport just received. And we're very excited to be supporting coastal erosion efforts that we're seeing from these storms and trying to address by multiple forms of flooding from across the state. I think that's a pretty good overview of MRP Action Grant Program, and I'll definitely be happy to address any questions in the breakout session. So I think we can go to the next slide. Next program is the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. It's managed through the Infrastructure Bank. And this program is for approved water pollution abatement projects, or making improvements that can help improve water quality or address areas of pollution entering into bodies of water within Rhode Island. So there's no set funding cap. Loans through this program can be up to 30 years, generally on a 20-year basis, with the repayment period and the interest rate set a third below market rates, offering lower interest loans. And the way this program works is that an applicant must first apply to DEM to be on the project priority list, which opens up each spring. And then after they're on the project priority list, then they're eligible to apply to RIB for financing. So what can it finance? Wastewater related projects, stormwater collection projects, treatment facilities, non-point source pollution management, and things of that sort. So like I said, these are for lower interest loans. It can go towards running the full gauntlet: planning, design, the engineering, and then of course the construction for the clean water eligible project types. And this funding eligible to apply for is mostly for public entities, local governments, water authorities, and districts. A lot of the funding through this program, we work with NBC on a handful of their projects that I'll mention in just a moment, but things of that type. And certain communities may be eligible for partial forgiveness depending upon the determined community need and federal criteria based upon the income of the area of if we can do some level of forgiveness or not. So this program is intended to be a long-term financing solution for these water pollution abatement projects. And the amount of water contamination and contaminants which mitigate determines the application's favorability. Once you submit an application to the bank, it's subject to a credit financials review. We have a third-party reviewer come in. We're looking at each entity's ability to make sure they can repay the loan over a set period. And then it goes to a recommendation, which is made, and it goes to our board for approval. Some examples that we see for this, one I'll mention is the most prominent is the Narragansett Bay Commission's, their CSO, the Combined Sewer Overflow Project, and the tunneling, which they're doing to address stormwater and sewer overflow going into the Narragansett Bay. And this is primarily through Pawtucket, Central Falls, and Providence, which a number of outfalls, which during high intensity rain events, a lot of untreated sewage, unfortunately, is flowing into the Narragansett Bay. Those systems, they're a lot of times they're maybe 100 plus years old. I can speak to that from working in Pawtucket a little bit. It's a lot of aged infrastructure there. And a lot of it is just not designed to deal with some of the challenges we're facing today. They weren't built for these high intensity, high precipitation rain events that we're seeing over and over again, especially in the past year. So with that, that increases the chance of untreated sewage going into the river. And this tunneling project, which I don't have the exact number, but I know it's many millions that the bank has provided in loans to NBC for the project, which will mitigate it. The wastewater will go into the tunnel underground and before being going to a wastewater treatment facility. And hopefully we can help mitigate some of those negative impacts and really improve the health of the Narragansett Bay. So I think that's a pretty good overview of the Clean Water Revolving Fund. I'll be happy to answer any questions in the breakout session.
Thank you so much, Anthony. That was awesome. Our next speaker is Kim Corriott. She is the new Chief Resilience Officer with the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, and Kim's going to be talking about two funding opportunities that are available through DEM. And before I'm handing it over to Kim, I just want to remind folks, if you have questions for any of our speakers, please put it in the Q&A, and we will get to those questions during that Q&A period. But put any questions you have as you're hearing the speakers. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. Okay, Kim, take it away.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Good to see you all. Thank you for having me here today. And thank you, Anthony, as well. We're looking super forward to the partnership with the Infrastructure Bank and CNC on Municipal Resilience Program 2.0 as well. Here today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about a couple of funding sources from RIDEM, specifically the Ocean State Climate Adaptation and Resilience Grant, the OSCAR grant, as well as our Climate Resilience Fund as well. So we'll start on OSCAR. This is a relatively new funding source. There hasn't been a previous RFP. The RFP to be released will be the first RFP for this funding source. And there's currently $4 million available. This is state budget funding. We're anticipating a release March, April of this year for this funding source. And the project types that we're particularly looking at are climate resilience projects that provide co-benefits such as habitat restoration benefits, public access benefits, these sorts of things. So you can see under the list of potential project types, we have projects that reduce the vulnerability of low-lying infrastructure. We're particularly talking removal, relocation of infrastructure, as well as things such as restoration of river and stream floodplains that provide that resilience benefit, that habitat restoration benefit, revegetation projects along these lines that also provide that resilience benefit and habitat restoration benefit. Land acquisition is something that's eligible through this as well, particularly land acquisition that provides, again, that resilience benefit, habitat restoration, but also public access as well is something that we're thinking about. Redesigning, resizing, and replacement of culverts is also eligible under this, as well as additional adaptation and resilience projects. So there's an opportunity to go a little bit broader from some of these line items if you have something in mind that you think would be a good fit, but doesn't quite fall into one of those categories. This funding source goes a little bit broader than some of the other state resilience funding sources that are available, in the sense that beyond design and construction, it also will fund planning. So that's kind of a unique thing about this particular source. And it is open to entities who own or control public land. So it can go beyond cities and towns. It can go to quasi entities, potentially state entities as well. So there's kind of a broadened opportunity, but it does have to be that it does have to be a project on public land specifically. It can't be a project on private lands that has broader public benefit. It does have to be on public lands. And I've talked a lot about co-benefits here, kind of further delving into this. There's a strong focus on projects that deliver feasible, technically sound climate adaptation solutions. There will be parts of that RFP and application process that focus very strongly on the adaptation benefits to be delivered, but specifically with also that habitat restoration benefit, that public access co-benefit to go alongside with it. And other components such as environmental justice, community engagement, these are aspects of the scoring criteria as well to keep in mind. And before I move on to the next one key thing to keep in mind about this funding source, not only is it state budget funding, so it could be a really, really great match for your federal funding sources similar to the MRP action grants to the Climate Resilience Fund, but this fund is also set up to not have a match requirement. So there's a little bit more flexibility on that front too. And with that, I think we can hop over to the next slide. Perfect. All right. Here's another similar one. I'll be going through the Climate Resilience Fund again here, RIDEM. Currently, the funding amount available for this is 1 million. However, there's 2 million slated in the upcoming bond proposal to further supplement this source. Similarly to something like your MRP action grants, there's a 25% match through this. Functions very similarly as you're likely familiar from the previous round of this fund. And there is also an expected RFP release for this, again, late March, early April of this year. Project types are actually very similar to the baseline eligibilities for the MRP action grants, with two kind of broad categories within the regulation. One being removal, relocation, or redesign of vulnerable infrastructure. And this is any infrastructure that is vulnerable to climate change impacts across a broad variety of impacts to be considered. But of course, things like flooding and those sorts of things come to mind immediately. The second large category is nature-based solutions. So any of those projects that protect, enhance natural systems in the face of projected climate change impacts. These can be any green infrastructure projects that use vegetation, pervious surfaces, these sorts of things to manage coastal, riverine, or inland flooding, erosion, or storm damage. And similarly, again, very similarly to your MRP action grants, these funds design and construction primarily. Planning and scientific research alone are not considered, but if there is a planning component that would be needed to support your design and construction process, there is some leeway for partial planning to be considered as a part of a larger design and construction award. Land acquisition is also eligible through this program, but it has to be 50% or less of the total project costs. So that's something to keep in mind. And for this particular funding source, government and nonprofit entities are eligible to apply. Similarly to the Oscar funds, within the RFP and the application, there's strong focus on projects delivering those feasible solutions, those technically sound climate adaptation solutions, those projects that also deliver co-benefits. And there's an expectation that the proposals address both the near-term and the long-term benefits to ecosystems, to the communities from this resilience perspective. There's also a strong drive for applications to identify how the project is consistent with state resilience plans, whether that might be the outcomes of your MRP workshops, whether that's your local hazard mitigation plans, your comp plans, these sorts of things, how that kind of connects both to the identification of why you're putting this forward as a priority project and your timelines for completion of that project, if that makes sense. So I will go ahead and pause there. It's a little bit of an overview, but again, I'll be in the kind of breakout sessions following this and happy to answer any questions that you have. Thanks so much.
Kim, thank you so much. I think an important point for a takeaway, obviously having all the details from these 4 state funding opportunities are really important, but also just, again, for those that are state funded, state sourced funding, they can be used as match for some of the opportunities you're going to hear about next. So the first speaker that we have to present our federal opportunities is Kyle Gray, who's Chief of Staff with Crow Environmental. And Kyle is going to be talking about the National Coastal Resilience Funds. He's going to be talking about the National Coastal Resilience Fund, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's National Coastal Resilience Fund. Kyle, take it away.
There we go. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Good to see everyone. Good to see such a good turnout here on this webinar, and excited to hear that SNEP has been doing this for 2 years now. So as Elizabeth mentioned, I'll be talking about the National Coastal Resilience Fund, which is one of several funding programs put out by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. This program's been around for 5 or 6 grant cycles now, and in the past few years, it was typically around a $40 million program. But with all of the BIL and the IRA funding, that was the impetus for this workshop, also came another 100 million for this program. So we're currently looking at 140 million nationally, and that is, for coastal projects, but not just on the shoreline. It's the entire coastal watershed, and there's a mapper that you can find online where you can put in your specific project location and identify whether or not you're considered one of those coastal communities. For the state of Rhode Island, most of the state is considered coastal, as you can imagine. And for Massachusetts, quite a bit of the state is as well. So, it's probably worth going through and looking at geographic boundaries. By and large, you're probably falling in the right geographic footprint. So because this is a funding program put out by the Fish and Wildlife Foundation, this is a public-private partnership. So there's money coming from NOAA, there's money coming from DOD, but there's also some from private partners, which is really exciting. This program typically ranges between 100,000 to 1 million for design and planning grants, and then between 1 million and 10 million for implementation grants. So you see those 4 categories on screen. We'll go through those one by one, but most of the time you'll be up to 1 million for those design and planning applications, and up to 10 million for restoration. That being said, there's no minimum or maximum, so those are just general guidelines. In terms of other funding information, match is not required for this program, but it is strongly encouraged. So match is out there, to demonstrate broad support, to demonstrate buy-in from the applicant and their partners. It definitely makes you more competitive, but again, it's not required. So if you're coming from a community that has a little bit less capacity, or match is just a little bit tougher, there's no set amount, but I would highly encourage you to think about match in different ways, whether that's in-kind or volunteer support, just bringing, that to the table and showing that there's some buy-in in your application. So we'll jump to the middle of the screen here to talk about different project types. So at the end of the day, we're really looking to enhance coastal resilience. And I'll get to that in just a moment as we go through the program priorities. But that can be done in 4 different ways. So there are 4 categories here, and all applicants should aim to identify one of these categories in their application. And you really shouldn't look to combine multiple categories into a single proposal. So again, there are 4 here. The first is capacity building and planning. This is kind of your entry level application category. It's meant to engage stakeholders, to build on resilience plans, to build those out where they might not currently exist, all with the goal of highlighting nature-based projects for eventual implementation. The second category is for site assessment and preliminary design. So this one is, getting that initial engineering design, finding specific sites for projects. The outcome here that you'd be working towards is 30 to 60% design. If you've already got that done and you're ready to move to the next phase of design, that would be the third category, which is final design and permitting. So the outcome that you're working to here is anywhere between a 90 to 100% design, and permitting conversations with federal and state permitters that are well underway, if not complete. The final category is the big one, that's restoration. So again, grants here typically range from 1 to 10 million. And this is where you're actually putting projects on the ground. And because that's the case, the idea is that all necessary planning, design, and permitting will have already been done. So if this is the category that you're looking at, you ideally want to check the boxes of the first three before applying for restoration. Broadly speaking, across all four categories, the program priorities stay the same. So bottom line is we're looking for resilience projects that enhance the resilience of coastal communities in the face of coastal hazards. So in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, we're thinking about sea level rise, flooding, and erosion, and doing so in a way that implements nature-based solutions, right? So using nature-based best practices to advance community resilience as well as fish and wildlife habitat, and those two go hand in hand. Some other program priorities, benefits to underserved communities, engagement with the community and other partners. NIFWF definitely doesn't shy away from innovative approaches. So if there's a different best management practice, this could be a good pot of funding for that. But long-term, they're thinking about sustainable and transferable solutions that can help to share lessons learned across the region. You do have to be located within the coastal boundary, as I mentioned. In terms of eligible applicants, though, most organizations can apply. You, of course, can't be federal, and it can't be a foreign organization, but state, tribal, regional, local, nonprofit, for-profit, university, all those folks are eligible. I think I've got 30 seconds left here, so I'm just going to wrap up with the timeline. So the RFP is out right now. The due date is April 10th. There's a pre-proposal, so that's that pre-proposal due date. There will be about a month or so for NIFWF to review applications. And then invitations for full proposals would be sent out after that, with applications due early July. So there's a link on screen for the RFP, and I'm happy to answer any questions when that time comes.
Thank you so much, Kyle. That is clearly an incredible opportunity, and hopefully we'll have some projects in Rhode Island funded with some of those National Coastal Resilience Funds. Next up, we will hear from Christina Madania, who is Outreach Coordinator for the Southeast New England program at EPA Region 1. And Christina is going to be telling us about some SNEP program opportunities. Christina.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yep, so I am Christina Madonia. I work in the SNEP program. We are focusing on two grants that I'll be talking about today, funding opportunities, And the first one is going to be our SNEP opportunity to advance resiliency. SOAR, as we call it for short, is a program that we are in our second cycle of funding. So this is a new program. Our RFP just recently was released, our request for proposals. And so the mission of this program is to really focus on disadvantaged communities within the SNEP region. So improving upon supporting that have been historically underinvested in, and really focused on meaningful community engagement for the design and implementation of these projects, addressing anticipated climate change impacts and also the historical impacts of environmental and social injustices. So categories for this specific project can be planning, implementation, outreach, training, and capacity building. I'm going to put a link in the chat in a little bit, but it will focus on any of those projects. They can be combined, they can be separate within the SNEP region. And the map that I will link has color-coded and an interactive design that you can find where exactly our disadvantaged communities are in the SNEP region, and help see whether or not you're qualified for that. So the funding is $1.25 million each year. The projects can be awarded in a range of $50,000 to $300,000 per award. We aim to do 3 major projects toward the end of that range, and then 7 smaller projects, more for set aside for new applicants. Specifically ones that haven't received funding in the last federal funding in the last 5 years. And this is to really bring about not only benefits to these communities, but also newer organizations that have been already rooted and doing active work in these communities to start getting those funding funneled back in. There is no match requirement. These are direct funds, so not incremental. It is a set amount at the beginning of the project when awarded, and then through the duration of that project. So it can be up to 5 years, and just working with the SNEP network resources to manage that fund and the project timeline. Some important dates about that. So applications are now open. They opened as of March 4th. We are going to have an informational webinar on this on April 16th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern time. Of course, we will send that out in the SNEP newsletter. I can also do a follow-up in the one-on-one breakout rooms if we'd like to know more information about that. You can submit questions to our contact email below by May 1st. That is the deadline, and then applications are due by June 7th. So we really encourage, especially first-time applicants, to take a look at that funding opportunity. And then the second one that I'm going to touch on is the SNEP network, which the New England Environmental Finance Center is our current awardee, and they've been doing a phenomenal job. And so in the way that they have put on this workshop, they provide an immense amount of resources for our grantees and are providing technical assistance. And so that request for applications is also currently open. Questions can go to the same email by April 12th. And then the closing date for that is going to be May 1st. And so that network, the network funding opportunity is really to continue the facilitation of this network for the next 5 years, starting in October of this year. There's no cost services. There's support to tribes, communities, environmental organizations. There is a list in the link of the RFA for eligible applicants. And the biggest criteria is that the work has to occur in our SNEP region. So again, I'll link that link in the chat for, thank you, for where exactly our region is and kind of interactive. The funding amount is $8.75 million over the next 5 years, and that does have a minimum 20% match. So any questions, I'm happy to answer in the breakout room, or feel free to email us as well. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. So again, reminder, any kind of generic, non-specific questions you might have about any of these funding opportunities, please put your questions in the Q&A box, the tabs at the bottom of the screen. And again, we're going to have breakout rooms with the funders. So if you have specific questions about a project that you're considering and want to speak to the funder about it, you'll have that opportunity in that breakout room. So keep those kind of questions to ask directly to the funders, but anything kind of generic, please feel free to put that in the Q&A. So our next speaker is Tom Ardito, who's director of the Watershed Implementation Grant Program with Restore America's Estuary. And Tom is a great partner and excited to hear about the SWIG opportunity.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm Tom Ardito with Restore America's Estuaries, and we partner with EPA to manage SNEP watershed implementation grants, as Elizabeth mentioned, which is a component of the SNEP program aimed at supporting the SNEP strategic plan that you can refer to on EPA's SNEP website. We've been managing this program since 2018, and in that time, we've awarded over 70 grants and about $15 million in awards. This year, for 2024, we have $2.8 million available for both Rhode Island and southeastern Massachusetts, and our grants are can range from $10,000 to $500,000, although most of them are in the $100,000 to $400,000 range. I think of the programs we've talked about today, I guess they're all a little similar. It sounds like a lot of them are on very similar timelines for funding. Ours may be the broadest in terms of the types of projects that we fund, the phases of projects that we fund, the ability to fund multiple phases, and we very much encourage multiple benefit projects. And it all really boils down to, like I said, implementing the SNEP strategic plan. And the three pillars of that plan are clean water, healthy ecosystems, and sustainable communities. So that pretty much, covers the majority of environmental work, certainly in Rhode Island. For 2024, to drill down on that a little bit, our funding themes are restoring small cities and urban environments, conserving and restoring rural and natural landscapes. Water quality is always a high priority for us and a focus of what we fund. Environmental justice and equity is also a priority. Environmental change and climate change, of course, is inevitable in prioritizing this kind of work. We very much favor funding local and regional partnerships and encourage all of our applicants to develop partnerships or take advantage of existing partnerships where possible. And we're very much about supporting regional learning within the SNEP region in terms of sharing practices, experiences, successes, failure, in order to elevate both the capacity and the practice of ecological restoration and resilience and sustainability throughout the SNEP region. Again, we really fund quite a wide variety of projects, including watershed scale estuarine restoration. We funded multi-community projects with that goal, green streets and neighborhoods, urban restoration, community engagement around that, environmental justice, of course, green job training related to that. We fund a lot of stormwater work, including demonstration projects and innovative approaches to stormwater management. We fund habitat restoration, including wetlands, rivers, dam removals, that kind of thing. We fund coastal resilience work, living shorelines, floodplain restoration, that kind of thing. We funded a number of pilot projects in innovative technologies such as permeable reactive barriers, bioreactors, innovative septic systems. We will fund watershed and regional planning and other kinds of plans aimed at restoration. And we've also funded some projects related to marine pollution, solid waste, fishing gear, stuff like that. And we fund conferences and technology transfer, and we can fund that on a smaller dollar basis. The eligible organizations include municipalities, state agencies, tribes, nonprofit organizations, regional planning organizations, universities, and again, we strongly encourage partnerships among different types of organizations and different organizations. And again, in terms of the timing of our program, it's very similar to NIFWIF, and we have a letter of intent, which is our first stage application. Our pre-application is open right now. You can go to snepgrants.org to find that. The full proposal, second step application is by invitation only, and we'll notify applicants or awardees, I should say, in July with announcing the grants in the fall. Typically, our grants are up to 2 years and 30% non-federal match is required. So I encourage you to go to snepgrants.org where you can find the request for proposals, the application link, and you can always contact me for more information as well. Thanks.
Thanks so much. The SWIG program has really provided some very essential funding for a lot of, I know, the stormwater management work that's gone on in this state. And so definitely a great funding opportunity. Next up is Daryl Moore, who is State Conservation Engineer with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Obviously, another huge source of support and funding for property owners and municipalities and others across the country, and particularly here in Rhode Island, they're a valuable partner. So Daryl, I want to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I first off just want to thank SNEP for putting this on. This is a very important work that's being talked about today, and opportunities. You know, we've got over 33% of the state is water. We're the third behind Hawaii and Michigan, I believe. And as Kyle mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of coastline in Rhode Island, you know, over 400 miles of coastline. You know, much of the state was developed during colonial times when we used waterways. And so this conversation is very, very timely for what we're needing to address. And so thanks to SNEP for this. So NRCS, part of USDA, with a Natural Resources Conservation Service. And we're charged by Congress to take on Public Law 566, which is the Watershed Protection Act, and also to handle emergency watershed program. And under PL 566, that's for less of emergency type of work. That's looking at more of a 10-year type of a program. And we evaluate flood prevention, water quality management, et cetera. You know, also can go into fish and wildlife enhancement, as well as the recreational aspects of things, and also agricultural runoff. Typically, the PL 566 is run in 4 phases. The first phase being a preliminary investigation feasibility report. And that's basically the government's due diligence. Makes sure that the project is a viable project before funding is put in. Typically costs about $60,000 to do the preliminary investigation. The second phase is when we do the plan or the environmental assessment or environmental impact statement. And that can be a couple $1 million. Hence why we want to do our due diligence before that. And then that typically takes a couple of years to do the plan. Once we've completed the plan, then we go back to Congress, get funding to move into the design. And that usually takes probably 18 months to 2 years to complete the design. And then we can move into the implementation and construction. So, but how do we start that project? First off, we need a sponsor. And for NRCS, our sponsors need to be a government organization. So it can be the state, it can be the local government, municipalities, the tribes, the can be a quasi-government such as the conservation districts. And so we've got plenty of opportunities to work with different organizations. And so if there's a watershed that anybody wants investigated, they can always get hold of NRCS first, and we can advise you which town or conservation district or tribe to work with, so as to start that process. And we get a sponsor. Once we have a sponsor letter, then we can get the fund, go to our national office to get the funding to move forward on that. The required match on the PL 566 is 0% on the first 3 phases. So the preliminary investigation, 100% covered. the plan 100% covered, and the design we have do 100% covered. It's the construction and implementation, and that has a match, and it can be anywhere from 25% to as low as 10%, and in some areas even 0. And if it's a recreational investment, then it's only going to be a 50%. But for most of the things we're looking at, they're going to be at least 25% on the matching. And so we're able to work with the different sponsors on that. And because it's not just a cash investment, it can also be an in-kind. And so the sponsor can do part of the work to offset. The Emergency Watershed Protection Program, that's more of an imminent response. So we're not a first responder, but we're right behind the first responders and wanting to help the local areas that have been impacted. In December and January, we had some significant rains. And right now we're working on probably 22 damage survey reports in approximately 10 or 11 towns across the state. And with those, again, the match, we need a sponsor. And so that typically that's the town that will be sponsoring it. We cannot work directly with the property owner. And with that, we can look at doing repairing the erosion that's taken place from those storms, removing debris from the waterways, structural means of alleviating the flooding, doing earthwork or walls. And we also have purchasing of homes and restoring the properties, the floodplains back to the natural conditions. And that program typically takes about 2 years from beginning to end. When we start start doing the emergency watershed protection, the sponsor needs to send in a sponsor letter within 60 days of the damage, and then NRCS has 60 days to perform a damage survey report, basically making sure that the work meets all the needs to be funded. And once we get the funding, that typically takes about 30 days after we've submitted the damage survey report. Then we've got about 18 months left that we can purchase homes and make the changes needed to the floodplain to kind of restore the floodplain. Just wanted to also touch base that we have another program that we can work more with individuals on, and that's our EQIP program, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. And in some cases, may be able to work on some of the watershed work, but that's a limited funding and has a few more hoops to jump through. And we can work on that with the district conservationists to try and see if they would be eligible to do anything with that program. And so yes, and so with that, I'm going to say if anybody has any questions, join us in the breakout room and be happy to answer any questions. Thanks, everybody.
Daryl, thanks so much. Obviously, the programs that Daryl was describing are really key, particularly, when communities have damages due to flooding, which unfortunately we're seeing much more of that these days. Those PL 566 and emergency watershed programs are really great federal programs that can provide some really good support to communities. So thank you for that, Daryl.
Thanks.
Our next speaker is Darcy Young, who is the Watershed Outreach Manager and currently serving as Interim Executive Director with the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program, and another great partner. And Darcy's going to tell us about their funding that they have available this year.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thanks to the SNEP Network for putting on this second annual webinar. It's really wonderful to hear from the other funders. For those of you who might not be familiar with our program, we're one of several national estuary programs working to restore coasts and their watersheds in southern New England. We are a partnership-based nonprofit that's focused on water quality, wildlife, and quality of life in the greater Narragansett Bay region, which encompasses not only the majority of Rhode Island, but also communities in southeastern Massachusetts, as well as southeastern Connecticut. We receive annual funding from the Environmental Protection Agency and the Southeast New England program. And each year we redistribute a significant amount of that support through funding opportunities. So for this year, we're still assessing topic priorities for this year's grant program. But in general, we fund projects that are consistent with our comprehensive conservation and management plan. That is basically a list of priorities for improving water quality, wildlife habitat, and public access to natural resources in our estuaries and their watersheds. So for example, in the past couple of years, our RFPs have included green infrastructure planning. Last year, we had one for habitat restoration and public access planning. We specialize in flexible funding for pre-construction activities from early public engagement, project selection, and capacity building up through final designs and permits. We work hard to streamline our application process, and we're always available to review project ideas with potential applicants. Projects have to take place within our watershed area, which you can see there in that map. We do have an interactive map on our website where you can search your project address and see if it's eligible, or you can always reach out directly to us for project eligibility. Eligible entities include, but aren't limited to, municipalities, state and local government agencies, tribes, nonprofit organizations, and academic institutions. This is federal funding, so organizations have to have the capacity to accept federal dollars, but one of the services that we provide as a staff is to work with organizations that might not have those policies in place just yet, to get those policies in place. So you don't have to have those policies ready by the time you apply to our grant programs. I want to add that we're in the fortunate position of expecting significant additional funding for the next 3 years through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And we do plan to put all of that money on the ground. So please keep in touch with us for future opportunities. We strive to be responsive to community needs for projects, so please let us know what your funding hurdles are. Lastly, beyond funding opportunities like this one, we also provide free services like convening, scientific communications, and GIS mapping to the communities in our region. So please reach out to us with your ideas and your needs. A few details in terms of the funding amount we expect to have available this year. We expect to have between about $450,000 and $910,000 available through an upcoming funding opportunity. Usually we fund about $50,000 to $250,000 per application. There's no match required. We hope to release the RFP for this opportunity in this early summer. We have our website available there where you can join our email list for RFP announcements or just email us directly. And with that, I think I will just take additional questions in the breakout room. Thanks very much.
Darcy, thank you so much. Folks, this is a really important one for when you have some issues that are, particularly percolating, but you haven't done that initial planning step. This is one of the few grant sources that will likely focus on that kind of the study assessment and the early design, the conceptual design phase. Often we'll see funding opportunities that really want to have those preliminary planning studies completed, and this is one of the few that will likely focus on that. So keep that in mind. And look, in your email for this opportunity that will be released this summer. So Darcy, thank you so much. We have one final presenter before we move into Q&A. So again, if you have any generic questions, please put them in the Q&A, and any specific questions, just you'll be able to get to those directly with a funder in those breakout rooms that we'll be providing you links to. So our next speaker is Laura Collins, and Laura is the program manager for the New England Water Infrastructure Network. Sorry. And this is the opportunity that NEWIN has is similar to what the SNEP network provides in terms of it's not actual grant funding, but it's the award of technical assistance. And I'll let Laura give us all the details.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thank you to my SNEP colleagues. My name is Laura Collins. I am the program manager for the New England Water Infrastructure Network, which is run through the New England Environmental Finance Center. As Elizabeth mentioned, we aren't technically a funder, but our program is designed to sort of support the great work that a lot of our funders are doing. And we are a free technical assistance provider. So similar, as Elizabeth said, to the work of the SNEP network. The New England Water Infrastructure Network, which we call NEWIN, it launched just about a year ago. And the aim of the program is to connect communities broadly with bipartisan infrastructure law funding for drinking water, wastewater, and non-point source pollution needs. Our assistance is free. We work with a network of experienced providers across New England to provide assistance to any SRF eligible system. So that includes municipalities, water utilities, federally recognized tribes, private entities are eligible in Providence. So a mobile home community. And we really focus on helping communities leverage clean water and drinking water state revolving funds. But we do also assist in identifying some other funding sources. One of the benefits of the SRF programs is that they provide a fair amount of flexibility to states and borrowers in terms of the types of projects that they support. So, we can assist systems with sort of the traditional like pipes and pumps of wastewater and drinking water infrastructure. We can support non-point source pollution problems or green stormwater infrastructure retrofits, for example, or we can, help with application assistance or, project planning and design. So there's a fair amount of flexibility in the types of opportunities that the SRF loans fund, and sort of that we can offer assistance at any step within that process. We do prioritize working with new borrowers, so systems that haven't previously accessed to SRF funding, or communities that meet state or federal disadvantaged criteria. I included a few project examples of the types of things that we are working on. At present, we have 13 active projects and one completed project across New England. So we're just closing out our first year here of work. In Providence, we are working with 2 communities, both on stormwater sewer systems. We're helping one who's been they've been awarded SRF funding, helping them navigate that process, put together the application, and write an RFQ. And the other community in Rhode Island that we're working with, we're kind of collaborating with the SNEP folks actually, and our technical assistance provider is going to be examining and doing a comprehensive assessment of their sewer collection system, and there's another consultant the SNEP folks are working with who's going to be doing the stormwater side. So basically, we you know, if you're interested, there's a water technical assistance request form linked here that you can request assistance through. You can also email me and I'll be available to answer any questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Laura. I was lost in my questions and answers. So my apologies for the delay in coming back on screen. So we have a number of questions in the chat. And so I will just kind of go through them in the order in which they were received. So the first one is from Margarita Pryor, who was saying that she would like to hear more about the alignment of the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank funding with state bond issues. And also wanted to note that any implementation actions identified in an approved comprehensive coastal management plan known as CCMP are also eligible for SRF funding. And those CCMPs are typically, I think those are the National Estuary Program planning documents. So I think to answer I would ask Anthony and possibly Kim Coriath if they might want to comment on the question about alignment of the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank and state bond issue funds.
Sure, I can start us out. So the MRP action grants are funded through the state's green economy bonds, which are on the ballot every couple of years. So the last bond was for $16 million approved by the voters. Like I said, we had allocated $12 million to 4 more coming up in an RFP this spring. And I know there's discussions right now between the governor's office, the state legislature, and talking about what the next amount could be for the green economy bond and how much could be allocated towards funding for the action grant program. I think right now it's looking like around $10 million, may potentially be on the ballot this fall. And if that was approved, at that point, we would be able to go out to bond and an RFP probably in the first quarter of 2025 for the next round for MRP action grants. But that's assuming it gets approved and that is the amount set. But I know there's still discussions underway what that amount is.
Okay. Kim, anything you want to add to that?
Nothing to add from my front. Yeah, all the same.
Well, while you're off mute, here's the next question, which I think was directed to the Oscar program and wanting to hear more about land acquisition.
Yeah, absolutely. I can provide a little bit of detail here, but given that that's kind of a new program and there hasn't been like a previous round, I don't know that I can speak to particular examples of how like land acquisition has played out through this program previously. But can just second that land acquisition is an eligible use of funds through this. I think, you know, as we go through this first RFP rounds, this first process, there's going to be a lot of things that are very precedent setting in terms of kind of like what standards we use, what levels of easements are required. But I would say if you have a land acquisition project in mind, definitely reach out to us. Myself, Sue Kiernan, who also works very, very strongly on the Oscar program, are happy to further discuss if there's any follow-up questions related to a particular land acquisition project that you have in mind.
Great. Thank you, Kim. The next question from Margarita Pryor is about the lifespan of the funding. And I believe this funding she was referring to is the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Coastal Resilience Fund. And it is, question is if several applicants get $10 million restoration grants, it could start wiping out the fund. So what is the lifespan of that funding source?
Yeah, that's a good question, Elizabeth. So the lifespan of the funding source, so the entire pot, the 140 million is for this year. In terms of using the funding, you have for implementation projects 3 years to use that. I'm not sure if that's answering the question or not, though.
Well, you know what? If it didn't answer it, then Margarita can go to the chat and ask it directly to you to do the follow-up, or unless she types something more in here. We have something from James Salenza, who just wanted to share that through a supplemental grant provided by the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences, the New England Consortium will offer free disaster preparedness and response training to communities in counties that were declared federal disaster areas in 2022, of which there are 4 counties in southeastern Mass and Rhode Island. The New England Environmental Consortium will provide some virtual, some in-person, virtual and in-person. There'll be 4-hour blocks, some 8 hours. This training will help develop the capacity of communities to respond to storms, floods, and other natural disasters. So I think if you probably were to search on the New England Consortium, you would get a hazardous materials and emergency response training program. You'd be able to get more information on that. We have a question from Winley Ferguson about whether commercial properties are eligible for purchase under the emergency watershed program. That's a question for Daryl.
Yes, Wenley, commercial properties are eligible. However, they're much more difficult to get to qualify. What ends up happening is if we have one commercial property that could be a couple $1 million, we have to be able to show a cost benefit of that $2 million to show that commercial property is worthwhile moving forward on. And so that is our challenge under EWP, is that cost benefit analysis. And we have a few more hoops that we have to go through. But the cost benefit analysis is usually where the commercial properties fall out. However, under PL 566, the commercial properties can be addressed a lot easier there. Hopefully that answered the question.
Okay, thank you, Daryl. We have a question from Kim Jacobs, who says she's working with a community that is interested in purchasing a backup generator for one of their emergency shelters. And she wants to know whether any of the grant opportunities have a component, or whether that would be something that, you know, could be covered under any of these grant opportunities we've spoken about. Anyone want to respond to that? Where emergency generators would be eligible?
I can chime in. I think that under the municipal resilience program, if it's a municipality applying, that's usually an eligible expense, so long as it's tied to a recommendation or identified hazard in their summary of findings report for that community. But we do have a project that is funded currently through MRP for emergency generators, I believe, for a couple different community centers.
Great, thank you, Anthony. Anyone else? Any of your programs? Okay. The next question that we have is related to NEWIN, and the question is, how does NEWIN align with the TCTAC program? And I understand that the local New England one has to be recompeted and the selected organization won't be announced until this summer. I think that's a question for you, either Martha? Okay.
Laura, do you want me to answer, or?
Yeah, I think you probably know more about the TCTA program than I do.
The TIC-TAC, as they call it.
Oh, the TIC-TAC. Oh, yes.
Is Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Program. Each EPA region has a technical assistance provider to work with EJ communities primarily for all kinds of things, not just climate resilience, but like health and we don't know who the Region 1 award will go to, but whoever gets the Region 1 award, there's a lot of alignment between our New England Water Infrastructure Network and the Thriving Communities for Environmental Justice. And we will be coordinating with them whoever that is, once we know who it is. But, you know, a lot of the same communities that have EJ concerns also will most likely have water, drinking water, wastewater, and non-point source concerns as well. So, you know, by joining together and aligning our programs, we can do a lot more for these communities than just one entity could do. So I hope that answers your question.
Great. Thank you so much, Martha. I think we're ready to move into the breakout session portion of our workshop. And so the way this is going to work is that you have received links in the webinar chat, are links to the 4 different breakout rooms. So I think we have 2 funders per room. So if you have a specific question for any of the funders, you will, and we'll show that slide in just 1 minute, you can go directly into that room by clicking on the link in the chat. And then you are able to move from one room to the other. You just have to go back to the chat. I think that will be in the chat for each of our breakout rooms. So that if you had a question for one speaker, how to answer it and wanted to go to the other, you can do that. You don't need to go back to the webinar when you're done in the meeting rooms. You're free to go on with your day. And before we break out, and actually, if we go to the next slide, I think it has the listing of the actual programs in each room. So I won't read it, but so we've got 4 rooms. We also are going to be emailing the links to the meeting room, so you can check your emails if you're having problems with finding the being able to access it via the chat. And I think that's all I have to say. I just want to thank you all. This has been an awesome session. So thank all the speakers, and I hope you all move into one of the chat rooms and get your questions answered. Okay, thanks.